Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today it is 4th of September 2020 and our topic is the privatization. So privatization means it is to sell the state-owned enterprises to the private sector or private people. When government is selling its organizations which are producing merit goods or maybe sometimes the public goods. So in that case, government is lowering its burden because whenever the nationalized or public sector organizations, they are run or administered by the government, they are showing massive losses and government's tax revenues that is usually used to fund or finance the losses of state-owned enterprises. So if they are running on loss basis, so government will be lacking funds in order to improve the infrastructure of the country. Government will not be able to have better roads and better facilities to the people because whatever the tax has been collected that is used to finance the losses of, you can say PIA in our case, or steel mill or railway. So when these organizations, state-owned enterprises, they are generating losses, what happens? Government will not be able to have better infrastructure or it is lacking funds, in other words. So when these are sold, the loss-making enterprises, sometimes government is getting rid of these loss-making enterprises and they are sold to the private sector. That process of selling of state-owned enterprises to the private sector, that is called privatization. So why government is selling them? Because state-owned enterprises are showing economic inefficiency, they are inefficient, they are loss-bearing, and they are not having a profit motivation as well. They are run for the sake of the welfare of the people rather than to increase the wealth, rather than to make massive profits or profit maximization is not the objective of the state-owned enterprises. They are only having the objective of the social welfare maximization. And every employee, every management officer of that enterprise is more motivated towards the objectives of his sales maybe, or sometimes they are more concerned about their salaries rather than the profit of the organization. And they are also involved in illegal activities of corruption as well. So when government is selling these burdenized state-owned enterprises and they are given to the private sector, so government aim is to run them effectively and on the basis of profit maximization. So by this, government, most of the tax revenues will be saved, which were previously used to finance the losses of these enterprises. And instead of financing them, now government is able to earn money through privatization proceed. And it will be able to reduce its budget deficit of the country. Rather to borrow money, it is an easy way to finance its budget deficit through privatization. And instead of financing them, now government will be able to collect more taxes from these privatized firms. So what are the methods of privatization? First method, that is called deregulation. Deregulation. Second is called direct sale. Direct sale of state-owned enterprises. Third is called contract out. And last is called franchising. Deregulation, the first step. In this case, government is not selling any enterprise, but government is removing the barriers to the entry of the new privatized firms. I can give you one example. Previously, there was only PTV, which was providing us news services and entertainment services through televisions. So no private channel was allowed to run television services. Later on, when government deregulated the market, Deregulation means the barriers were uplifted. Now private channels were allowed to telecast their transmissions. So we are now having more private channels along with public sector channel, which are providing us better news services, entertainment services on electronic media. So we say deregulation means when barriers from the entry of new privatized firms, private firms, they are uplifted. The barriers are uplifted, and now government is allowing competition in the market. Private sector will be allowed to start the businesses in the business environment on the basis of profit maximization. So private sector investment will be encouraged, and by this more employment opportunities will be created, and now government will also be able to have more tax revenues out of these channels or these firms which are privatized now in the private sector. So deregulation is a tool of privatization in which government is uplifting the barriers from the entry of the new private firms into the market. So if we say government is uplifting the barriers of electricity production, then more private sector firms will be producing electricity in our country, and shortage of electricity can be removed, like we have done in case of television services. We are having more than 100 private channels in our country, and in India you can find more than 500 600 channels which are providing entertainment services to their people. So deregulation is actually allowing the private sector to increase their investment. So it is only the uplifting of the barriers for the entry of the new firms. Whereas the direct sale of state-owned enterprises, in the second method, now government is selling its enterprises to the private sector. There are two ways by which government will be able to sell the state-owned enterprises. One is direct sale through auction. Like the smaller enterprises, they are auctionized. Government is announcing that this rest house, this restaurants, and these types of other smaller organizations, they will be auctionized, show your bidding and show your interest to buy. Then government is selling these smaller enterprises to the highest bidders. People are giving their own bids in order to buy these state-owned buildings. So these enterprises, they will be sold to the highest bidders in the private sector. Now they will be run by the private sector effectively with the name of profit maximization. So first time government will be selling or privatizing the smaller enterprises in the case of auction method, and whatever money is received through privatization, that will be used to finance its budget deficit. In the first case, government was receiving money in the form of authorization of the new firms, that they are registered firms in the private sector, and in that case government is now collecting money, but here government is directly collecting money through sale of the enterprises. And second case of the direct sale is when larger enterprises like Pakistan Railway, PIA or steel mill, they will be privatized. The government will be selling their shares in the stock exchange, and gradually they will be privatized. First of all, government will be selling 10% of the shares, 20% of the shares. When more than 50% of the shares are floated into the private sector, and now they are owned by the private people, then we say now that firm is not in the hands of public sector, but now it is in the private sector, and now its CEO or managing director comes from the private sector. So we find this thing that direct sale can take place by issuing shares into the stock exchange, and by that they will be able to sell their shares, and now the larger firms will be privatized, and government will be having less role until unless it is selling all the shares to the private sector. And once it is more than 50% of the shares are in the private sector, although government is also sitting in the board of directors meeting, it is also the shareholder, but the main decision making will be made by the private sector. So this is the direct sale through auction or through selling the shares in the stock exchange to make the firm as a public sector, public limited firm or private limited company. So that is another case. The contract out means what? When government is rendering different types of state contracts to the private people in order to produce the goods or services for the society. I can give you one of the example. Government wants to construct a road from this district to another, or government is going to construct a motorway from Lahore to Sialkot or to anywhere else, or government is going to have construction of university in our city of Sialkot. So in that case, what happens? Government is asking the private contractors to show their interest whether they will be able to construct for the government at lowest possible cost. So different contractors, they will contact the government offices. Government is announcing or government is advertising different types of tenders in the newspapers. And now the contractors, they are applying to get a contract of construction of a road or construction of a bridge or construction of a building, airport building or anywhere. So government is releasing funds and it is making it possible that more roads could be constructed through contracting out. Because if government is constructing roads by its own means, so in that case it has to hire more workers, more machinery will be employed, and it has to spend more money on the capital equipment to construct roads. So at one time, government will be able to construct only single road, and it may take more than 1 year, 2 years. So efficiency of the government work will be less and less because that is less profit motivated. So when it is contracted out to the private sector, now government is monitoring the activities of the private contractor. In this case, government is issuing a contract to the lowest bidder. Keep it in mind, when government is selling, government is selling it to the highest bidder. And when government is contracting out to construct a road, to construct a building for the government, or in other case, whenever government is contracting, giving contracts to the private contractors, so in that case, the lowest bidder will be provided that contract in order to construct a road or a bridge or any building for the public sector. So contract out, now contractor will be spending money, whatever government is releasing funds to that contractor. So he is reducing the cost of road construction, and out of that fund, he is also keeping his own profit. So he is actually profit motivated. So government employees, government authorities, they are checking the work and they are monitoring and they are supervising the work of the private contractors, whether he is using the same material as he has mentioned during the time of the contract, and many other things are there to supervise the contracted projects. So these three, now the private sector is working for the sake of the government, and now it is improving the quality of the product as well, and now they will be more profit motivated and they are going to spend money by taking it from the government or public sector, and more things could be produced through the private sector, rather government is producing them by its own. So franchising means what? When government is issuing franchise business to the private people. Like I can give you one example, like PIA is a state-owned airline. So it is necessary that state-owned airline should be selling its tickets to the traveler by their own offices. But what happens? Government cannot open too many offices in different parts of the country. So they ask the private people to get the franchise of this PIA. So in that case, if I take a franchise of PIA, then I will be selling tickets on behalf of PIA, which is a state-owned enterprise. So this franchise business is fulfilling all its expenditures by its own, and now government will be allowing to work on its behalf to the private people, and they are also more profit motivated as well. All right, I can give you another example, like sometimes we say Franchise business is that you might have seen the utility stores. They are usually state-owned. So if you are applying for a franchise of your utility stores, the government will be supplying you the goods. So that franchise business will be run by the private sector, and now it is more profit motivated. So in this case, in case of private franchising, government does not require to hire the people in the public sector. So this is the responsibility of the private sector, how many workers they are going to hire, and they have to pay the salaries by their own pockets, by their own means, and the rest profit they have to keep their profit margins as well. And government is issuing a franchising business rights to that person, and in that case now it will be more effectively run. So all these methods, deregulations, direct sale, contract out, franchising, they are they are the methods of privatization proceed. And once the more private sector is involved in the economic activities, then the decisions of what and for whom to produce, they will be made by the private individuals, the private producers in the market. They will be deciding. So what next government will be doing? Government will be approving the regulatory authorities. Regulatory authorities. You have authorities which will be looking after the activities of these privatized firms. All right. Like I can give you example, PTA, Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, or PEMRA. You have heard this name many times, PEMRA. Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, PTA, Pakistan Telecommunication Authority. Before the year 2000, we were having Pakistan PDCL as a single supplier of telecom services. So once government has allowed the private sector to launch the cellular services in Pakistan, now they have also made an authority which is checking the activities of these privatized firms. How are they facilitating the consumers? And if they are not facilitating the consumer, then they have to pay the heavy fines to this authority. PEMRA means Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority. They are looking after the activities of television channels, all the electronic media channels. They are monitored by this authority. They have laid down their rules and regulation to these channels, and if they are violating, then PEMRA will be imposing different types of fines. Okay, annual subscription fees or licenses, they are also issued by these authorities, and they are also generating revenue for the government. So this is about privatization. We have concluded our online lessons till today, and I hope so by the 15th of this month we will be able to start our regular physical classes rather than online classes. So that's all for today, and we will see inshallah in our next class, I think so, in the school as well rather than on an online classes. We hopeful that government will be deciding the opening of schools and universities by the next week, inshallah, or by the 15th of September. Then we will be having more physical classes rather than these online classes. Thanks all for today. If you have any questions, you can raise in this question answering session.